of Jonathan and Larry. Now, there won't be any decision-making provision there because as executors, you're always joint. There's no such thing as joint and several for executors. They are jointly responsible. There is the power to delegate to one or the other, but technically an executor, more than one executor is appointed jointly, okay? Unlike powers of attorney. But let's add one more person, and let's say it's Frank. So now we have 3 primaries. So eState is going to ask us for a decision-making choice here. So if I click on decision-making, it knows there are 3, so it will ask us, it'll default to majority rule, but we could have unanimous, we could have majority rule. Let's pick majority rule. Then we have another option. So we can have a simple majority, that means any 2 out of 3 in this case, or a specified majority. That is, we want a majority, but we need at least 1 or more people to be part of that majority. So let me just show you how we would do that. We choose specified appointees must be part of majority, and then which of the 3 have to be part of the majority. So Jonathan has to be part of the majority. So that's how you would do it. So that's how you appoint it. Now let's go to alternate appointments. So now let's say we want to we change our minds. So that's how you would do that. Let's say we want to add an alternate for Jonathan if he can't act. So we take Blake, and the condition is if it's a single person, it would be all. So up would come the 3 choices for the people who we could replace, and we want to replace only Jonathan. So what I did there is I clicked off everybody's name. I'm going to just do that again. I go appointee, I forget, I think it was Blake, condition, if all, and then up comes the 3 options. So you'll see an X. So if I don't want to replace him and I don't want to replace him, I want Blake to act only if Jonathan can't. Now I go. So that's how that might work. Now, the other point here, and what I'm going to do is get rid of this person. So let's say we have 2, and I want Blake to act for Jonathan, which is fine. That's what we've got here. If Jonathan can't act, Blake. But let's say actually what the client wants is that I want Blake to act in case either of them can't act. So we change if all to any. Now it would say Blake would act if either Jonathan or Larry can't act. Okay, that's how we choose that. Now let's change our idea where we want Blake to act only if both of them can't act. We would change if any to all. So if all of Jonathan and Larry cannot act, that's when Blake would act. And that's the difference between those. Okay. Just pause there for a second to see if anybody had any questions about that kind of that primary appointment and the alternate appointment. I'm going to get into the other stuff in a second. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question and just stop me as I go. So that's how appointments work, and that's how it works in every one of the categories. So powers of attorney, trusteeships, you can appoint primaries, you can appoint alternates under certain circumstances. Sure, Bev, come on in anytime. Just exit and reset. Can people hear me? I hope I haven't been on mute the whole time. Vic, can you hear me?
No problem at all.
Good. Okay. Hey, Bev just said, I got a little panic because Bev said, I can't hear you. I'm thinking, oh my God, I've been talking for all this time.
Loud and clear, Jared.
And I'm on mute. Good. Questions, guys? Anything? Okay. So let's go to compensation. So right now, you only have one choice. You can only select compensation for all of the appointments. So people cannot hear. I don't know why that is the case, because most people can hear. Can you guys just check that your speakers are on, because other people can hear me. So we're going to record this, by the way. So you can, thanks guys. So you can, if you miss it, you'll get to see it again. So, yep.
On that, where are the recordings posted?
I think we send them to you. I'll ask Michaela how we do it, but
I missed a few trying to find
yeah,
it.
I think we send you a link.
Yeah, we'll send a link afterwards, and they'll be on YouTube.
Thanks, Nick. So just talking about compensation. So right now, you can only set compensation for all of the executors. We haven't yet, and it's on our list, I promise you, that you're going to actually be able to choose as between different people. If you want to do that right now, you have to do that manually. Okay, but so the options for compensation are either none. So if you choose none, then what you'll see is, let me just show you none. I'm going to show you, yeah, it would say something like, my trustees shall not be entitled to compensation. Okay. Then we have court's discretion. That's the default. And basically, if that's chosen, then what you'll see is, I'll just show you the, where is it? That's hourly rate. Sorry, I'm going to find it for you. It basically says, as agreed between the beneficiaries and the trustee, and if they cannot, and failing agreement by a court of competent jurisdiction. So it's the default sort of, if you didn't have any clause in it, it's, in other words, the Trustee Act, basically. And then you can choose to include pre-taking or not. I typically choose pre-taking. The other options are fixed in a will. So if you want to fix the amount, then you can pick either a lump sum, an hourly rate, or a percentage. We're testing these out right now, so we're refining some of the wording, but those are the ones that are available right now. And so there may, I'm not 100% happy with the compensation section, so I'm working on making that a little bit better. But that's the idea. If you wanted to fix the amount of compensation to a lump sum, you can do that. You can do an hourly rate, but often I find that there's a bit of tweaking that's necessary when you're getting into more complicated compensation agreements or compensation schemes. So that's, and you can exclude people from that as well. So that's that. Fixed by agreement. This is typically seen where you've got a compensation agreement with a trust company. The good news is we're building so that if you ever have a trust company as a trustee or an executor, you know how you have to put in the special clauses for that trust company? eState's going to do that automatically. So you won't actually even have to, you'll pick fixed by agreement, but it'll know to put in the wording for Bank of Nova Scotia, for example, et cetera. So those are the ways to do that. There's also dispute resolution. So if your client wants to say, okay, if my executors can't agree, here's what I'd like them to do. I'd like them to, pick a mediator or whatever you want, consult with John or arbitration or resign. If you can't agree, you have to resign. I threw that in because I once had a case like that, or instructions like that. I don't use that very often. And quite frankly, I've never used it with eState, so I'm not 100% sure what happens. But if you ever get to that point and you try it, let me know. We will test it actually and make sure. So that's what that does. And so that's basically how the appointments work. Guardians would work the same way. Just before I go to that, don't forget there's a sync button. So very often the appointment is, I'm going to try this. I want to appoint, the spouse first, and I think it's Jane as the spouse. So what it will do is it will reverse the name. So in Jane's will, it'll reverse Jane with James. So that's how it automatically does that if you hit the sync button. Okay. and then it puts everybody else in there. Now, what happens if you've got somebody that you're appointing as they tell you all of a sudden, oh, by the way, you know, yep,
Can I ask you a question?
sure, yep,
If you click sync when you're in the appointment section,
yes.
does it also sync the assets or just the appointments?
We have chosen to go sync basically by screen. So this will only sync the appointments.
Thank you.
Let's say we wanted to add a person that's not in our family tree and somebody we haven't added. This happens all the time where all of a sudden, you know, it's my financial advisor I want to appoint as the executor. You can add them by clicking the plus button here. And then you can put in the first name, the last name. Right now, don't worry about relationship for now and go add. So now John Smith appears as, here's what I would advise though at that point. Because right now, all it knows is your first name and last name, doesn't know gender, doesn't know middle names, doesn't know anything else. If you now go back to the People tab, in the other, you'll see John Smith there. And now I can edit John Smith and put in further details about John's middle name, you know, his gender. It will warn me in case I forget. It'll say to me, oh, by the way, John Smith doesn't have a gender, so you might want to go back and put it in if I try to generate something. But here's things where you might want to put in things like, oh, that he's a US citizen, right? So I put in he's a US citizen, and then, you know, all of a sudden there'll be a warning here that John James Smith is a non-resident, right? So don't forget that. Like here are the problems with that. So that's why that's an important spot. And that's how we do it. Question, and it works the same. So if I go to powers of attorney, works basically the same. I'm just going to pick a couple of people here. So I'm going to pick two primaries. And now it's going to give me decision making, because as we know, you can appoint in powers of attorney, you can appoint jointly or joint and several. And so decision making comes up as joint. You can pick joint and several. Or you could pick joint. So, and the wording will be different depending on what you do there. And if you added 3 people, it would also give us an option to make it majority rule, same as executors. I know some people have commented on, can you make it different for different combinations? We haven't got to that point yet. So, you know, Blake and Jane are joint and several, but then, you know, Jonathan to replace Blake, but in that case, I want it to be joint. Sadly, at this point, you have to, well, not sadly, it doesn't happen that often, but if you did want that, you'd have to draft that manually. The other places that you might see, you might be dealing with appointments is in the scenarios. So let me just, as an example, I'm just going to remove this for a second. So let's create a qualifying spousal trust just using our macros. So there we go. We have a QST here. But we want to change the trustees. So the trustees are not going to be the same as the executors. So we click off that and we just add the people that we want as the trustees for the spousal trust, and dealt with in the same way. So this applies for any trust that you create. You can change it by default. Typically in my practice, it's often the trustees of the trust are the same as the executors, but if they're not, or you want different trustees for that, then you can click off that. Special provisions. All right, I knew somebody was going to ask me about that. So let me just show you. We're going to figure out what special provisions. This is what gets printed out. So if you put special provisions in here, it'll print out the name and then says has the following special provisions. It's really, and it then highlights it. And so it's really just a reminder, because that's something you're going to have to draft yourself. Okay. So because there are people come up with some unusual conditions for people, and so or some specific provisions for executorships that we can't think of everything, and so that's what that would do. It would sort of highlight it to say, by the way, I want you to draft this. And that's what we've done basically for special provisions is we've just highlighted it, and it's usually something that's you're gonna need to do manually. So that is in about 20 minutes the idea of appointments. Let's see. I know Michaela gets a bunch of questions. Let me just see what if I've answered all the sort of typical questions. So on guardianships, let's just go to that. So you don't have to appoint the parent as the other guardian because by law they're the other guardian. So what the drafting that comes up is that it says to the extent that I have authority to appoint a guardian. So that would be only if the other parent wasn't alive. So you don't need to add the parent as the primary guardian. It asks, one of the questions that Michaela gets is what happens if you got one kid over 18, one kid under 18? As long as you've put in the ages, dates of birth, then eState will know how many kids you've got under 18 and will only address guardianship it'll name the kids. Yeah. So conditional appointments, that's where I would put that in special provisions because that's you're going to have to draft on your own. For now, that's if people want to see that as an option, we'll build that in and it will do it automatically. We talked about joint and several. So we explained about if any or if all, and compensation, right? So that we're building as well, this idea that you can have separate compensation agreements depending on who's appointed. So we're working on that. So that's that. If you got into a situation, let's say I was working on this and I wanted the brother to gets a lump sum of 50K, but Bank of Nova Scotia gets their comp agreement. I'd put a note in my list here because I'd know I need to draft 2 clauses. Like it would draft 1 clause and then you'd have to punch in the other clause for now anyway. Other things, if people have appointment provisions that they don't see in eState, let us know because we'll build them for you to make that a more fulsome dialogue box and options. So please let us share with us about that because it would be helpful. So questions, let's open the floor on any first, maybe any questions on appointments, and if there wasn't something I covered or there was something I didn't cover, let me know. Anybody?
I have a question, Jordan.
Sure.
This is Miriam speaking. So we had a couple appointing guardians, husband and wife, and then there came the question, what if they're not living together? Who would you like to have appointed as the guardian or like the primary guardian?
Yeah.
Is there a way to address this through eState?
I mean, yeah. So my typical rule is because it's a temporary appointment only, I typically ask them that question. If they weren't together, what would you want? So I prefer typically to put 1 person down because again, it's only a 90-day appointment. But if you want to name the 2 of them, you could do that. And then I would put that in a special provision, where I say, if they're living together, and quite frankly, that's something you might have to manually draft. So you might say, okay, that person and that person together, but if the condition might be, if they're not living together, I'm going to appoint a third party. That would be a condition that you'd pick other, and then what that would be. And let me know if that does work for you, or if it doesn't, let me know as well, because I do have that does come up from time to time. What happens if they're separated? And so yeah. I found guardianship to be a bit tricky as far as what options to build in, and so we're going to look at that as well. And again, please provide feedback and say, I'd really like to be able to choose this. And once we have that choice in there, then obviously we want it. It's good for everybody. So please. I'm just wondering if Bev made it back in. I hope hope it worked for her. And I think Angela as well, so.
I did make it back in, thank you, and I can hear you, so
Great, great.
I'm sorry about that.
No worries. I hope Angela was able to as well. Other questions, guys? Anything else? I'm sticking around, so if you don't have to worry. You know, it's.
Yeah, Jordy, if we're not doing, on another matter, if you have a life insurance policy
Yes.
and you want, wife has the policy, she wants to name the husband, the beneficiary in the will.
In the will or in a separate designation?
Or in a separate designation.
Okay, yes.
Does it automatically do that? Is there something you have to do?
Yes, so what you would do, let's say, I'm going to give you an example. So we got life insurance. And hopefully we have a policy number, but so this is how I would plan for the life insurance. So I'd say, okay, the life insurance is going to go to Jane, okay? And now if I create the life insurance declaration, what it says is it's going to Jane. I'll just show you this. So here's the life insurance. Now it would fill in the name of the company and the policy number if you put that in. So it says, I want Jane to get it as the sole beneficiary, but if my spouse is not alive, what it typically says, it sort of defaults to the idea that if my spouse is not alive, then I want the executors to receive the proceeds as trustees, and to deal with it as a separate insurance trust consistent with the residue of my estate. And then you have the option to include if it's pursuant to a secondary will or your will, whatever. So that's the default. If you put it, giving it to the spouse first, and then it would give to the executors as alternates in trust, basically.
So it doesn't automatically go into the will, it goes into a separate designation.
Yeah, I've always believed in putting it in a separate declaration because for probate tax reductions, an argument that it's not part of the will.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well then I have one more. If you are unfortunate enough to go in and set something up and then say sync, you've put in all the husband's information and you sync it, then you go into the wife and you sync again, which you're not supposed to do.
So you sync back the other way.
Exactly. And then everything is messed up. How do you fix it? Start over?
Oh, God. I think, yeah. So, yeah, pause before you hit that sync button.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think you can go back.
So do you have to sort of clear?
But if you've synced it, then it actually should work because you synced it from one to the other. So now they have what you had in the first one. Right? So you could sync it back. Like if I synced it to Jane and then so now Jane has what James had and in the initial gifts and the residue. Now if I synced back, now James would have it. So it should actually work relatively well unless you've changed it from one to the other. That's the only thing.
Okay. So, and I guess if I synced while I was in the asset button, that would be a really bad thing.
You can't sync here.
No?
No. Assets are automatically, joint assets are automatically synced, but yeah, you can't sync assets. They're automatic. Okay. It's only scenarios, appointments.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else having issues or questions or trying to do something? All right. Any suggestions for topics for the upcoming weeks that people have found that they've had issues with or anything like that? We're always welcome your ideas for new topics that we can sort of delve in a little bit more depth. So if you do, just flip us an email. Nancy, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, how do I do a secondary will here?
So you plan out the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And in provisions, there's a tab for secondary wills at the assets. So you can identify what assets you want to define in the will, in the secondary wills. And then all you simply do is you create multiple wills. You don't have to do anything else. What it does, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. It's great if all of a sudden they say to you, you know, you've done the whole draft and then they reconsider and say, yeah, no, I do want to go with multiple wills. Well, you could just click on the button. The downside is right now it takes 4 minutes. Now the good news is our dev team says that in the next couple of months, it's going to be reduced to seconds. So you better not build this one by the hour.
I was going to say, I'm not going to show the client how long it takes.
No, that's right. That's the one thing you don't show them.
They think I'm out there chiseling it on a rock.
That's right. So yeah, and then what happens, the way our multiple wills work, you don't necessarily know if you're giving specific assets away, okay? It's going to put those provisions in both primary and secondary wills because it'll say, you know, to the extent that this asset forms part of my primary estate, give it away. And then in the secondary will, it'll say, to the extent it forms part of my secondary estate. Why do we put it in both? Well, it may be an asset that you would expect to be in the secondary will, like shares in a private company or personal effects, but you need probate for whatever reason to deal with it because you're now selling it to a third party and they want probate. So that's the reason. And if so, you could disclaim it and have it form part of the primary estate. But the second reason is, let's say you've got a condo that you're giving away and you're like, well, a condo is never going to be, we're never going to be able to transfer it without probate. Well, there is a way, of course, which is holding it on a resulting trust by a, you know, joint ownership or by a nominee corporation or something like that. So it, in fact, might be part of the secondary estate. And that's why you see the specific bequests in both wills.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. So you'll see this. I'll pop it up for you in a moment.
Okay.
I always find it 4 minutes long. Yes, Mark.
Going back to the secondary wills for a second, is there a situation where you would have different trustees between the different wills? Does the program account for that?
It does not account for it. I would suggest that if you're going to do that, we be very careful about having different executors for primary and versus secondary wills. It's a real problem. It could be. If you're going to do that, then you're going to draft that yourself. All you'll do is go into the secondary will and change the executors' names. Okay. I would not build that as an option, to be honest with you. I don't want people using it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Now, you could have different trustees, right? So you could, if you want an executor to deal with a specific asset that you expect to be in the secondary will, then you could add them as a trustee for that asset. That you could do. But as executors, I would resist that. See how long 4 minutes takes? It's a long time. It doesn't sound long when I say it, but it's...
Well, I've got a question that might kill a few seconds.
Okay,
anyway.
attaboy, Blake. I'm in.
For the first time, I'm dealing with a person who wants a provision in his will. He fosters a child through Canada Christian Fund or one of these organizations, right? And he pays whatever a month. He wants that to continue until the child becomes 18 years of age or until he leaves this program. Oh, my time is terrible. Your export.
No, go ahead. Go. No, please keep going. Keep going.
Anyway, I was struggling with the wording, and I just Michaela was helping me, and she did a fine job of helping me, but still not sure if I'm doing.
How much is it? How much is it?
How much is it?
Yeah, like are we talking like $10 a month kind of thing? Or
It's $444 a year for that. We're talking about 4,000 tops.
Yeah, I would not set up a trust for that. No. I would say make a donation of $4,000 or whatever it is to, or multiply, subtract, I mean, if you want to get fancy, how many years left of his age, less whatever, and multiply by 400 and, but I would definitely not do anything fancy that says, you shall continue to pay the $448 a month or a year.
It would just be a lump sum then.
Yeah,
That's what
how
you're
I
saying.
would do it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jordy. Thank you.
So here's the multiple wills. I just wanted to show people that. So the definitions here, depending on what I pick, if I had corporate assets, it would list the corporate assets. And then it would say, plus any other shares of any other private corporation and that I control, or if I had put in I or my spouse control. And then it's got trust assets, those assets held on a resulting trust, registry system real estate. And so that's basically the definitions. And then you'd have the gifts, here's the home. So with respect to my home, to the extent it forms part of my primary estate, I want you to do this. And then in the secondary will, which is all part of the same document, it's just down farther, it would then say, with respect to my home, to the extent it forms part of my secondary estate. And that's how we do it.
Question about corporate assets, Jordy. You
Sure.
default to corporations which you control.
Yes. If you pick, let me just show you where that's chosen, and then I'll just so people understand. So in here, it says so we have our specified name corporate assets if you've got specific corporate assets, but you can also add in if it's controlled by me or my spouse or my family is the way we sort of, now family isn't the most specific of things, but hopefully it's good enough for the purposes of that definition. So go ahead, Mark.
I was thinking of situations where, for instance, a family or extended family, they wouldn't necessarily insist on probate. Does the automatic provisioning allow for the shares to go in both wills? So if you determine you don't need probate even for slightly further relations or whatever, you're okay?
Yeah, so I would put them in the secondary will and then have them disclaimed.
Okay.
So I would click off all three here. And then in the will, I'll just show you what it would say. So here where it says any enterprise it would say I, comma, my spouse or my family control. And you might want to go in to say, be a bit more specific if you know what you're talking about as far as the family. But if you know the corporation that have shares in, it would be named as it would be named in there.
Even if it isn't a controlled one?
Right, unless you want to delete it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just concerned that their control would be restrictive in some cases.
Yeah, well, because you want to make, I mean, typically we don't want to include, like if we didn't say that, we could have 1% and the other 99% are held by a bunch of other people and not be able to get rid of it without probate. I would still put it in the secondary will because we have the disclaimer clause, right? And the disclaimer is here for everybody that just says, look, if some property would ordinarily fall into the secondary estate by definition, but we need to get probate to deal with it, then you can disclaim it and it's part of my primary estate.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Just on the multiple wills thing, I just want to demonstrate this if you've never seen it before. It's kind of an effective. I don't know if this has. Let's just see. This is Jane Jones. Okay, let's go to James. Could have picked better names. So we're talking to James here, and we're saying so. Oh, and by the way, here's your situation. Here's your initial gifts. If we used multiple wills, you'd save $41,000. Do you want to use multiple wills or not? So by clicking on the Apply Multiple Will Planning, it's going to deduct the probate tax on any personal effects, private companies, assets that are held, shareholder loans, assets that are held with a bare trustee. So it'll deduct that. So you can give a client an idea of, here's the advantage of doing it. That's a neat feature, and it's just you can click on and off and say, well, you want 40 grand or no? It'll cost you an extra $1,000, but I'm saving you 40 grand.
Jordy?
Yep.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
And you've dealt with this before, but I'm getting senile in my old age, so I've sort of forgotten the answer. How do you deal with income tax again? To give the client an idea of what the beneficiaries might be facing.
Sure. So let's just take here I have a country house, right? It's not our principal residence. So
Right.
I know that they tell me, I gather some information, because if I'm going to figure out how much income tax I'm going to owe, I need to know two factors. I need to know its value now,
Right.
and I need to know basically what its cost base is, or what it was purchased for, and plus any amount put in, et cetera. So in this case, they tell me, okay, I bought it for 100. It's worth 200. So what I would do here is I would take what's the capital gain? It's 100, right? The difference between 200 and 100 is 100. And then I take a quarter of that. So $25,000. That's the amount of income tax. Sorry, I put that in the wrong category. That's mortgage. The amount of income tax would be 25 as a rough number. That assumes they're in the highest tax bracket. But that's how I typically put in, because the income tax is a manual calculation. That's typically what I would do for any assets other than a registered asset. So an RSP, I would put in 50% of the value. But in this case, an asset that's got an accrued capital gain, I'm putting in 25% of an accrued capital gain.
Right.
And the reason for that is capital gains, 50% of a capital gain is taxable income. So that's 50%. And then 50%, the highest tax bracket is 50% of income is income tax. So that's why we get a quarter.
So you're just providing them with the worst case scenario then?
Absolutely. Give them the worst, because then when I plan for them and I show that, oh, by the way, there's this money, but if we leave it to the spouse, like in this case, there's no income tax. Why? Because we had a spousal trust. But let's remove that completely. And we show, oh my God, there's all this tax here, because that's including that $25,000 of tax. If we gave that to Jane, who's the spouse, I can show you how we get rid of that. That country house, which had $25,000 capital gain, we've just saved $25,000 by giving it to the spouse. See that?
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. We're going to wrap up in about 5 minutes. If anybody has any other questions, happy to do it. We're here every Thursday. This time we do an advanced a webinar on a specific topic for about 20 minutes and then open the floor. So
I have one more question.
Sure, Nancy.
How do I deal with loans to children that the testator wishes to forgive?
Good question. So if I was doing multiple wills, I would put non-arm's length loans in there. Check that box off, because I want that to be part of my secondary estate. It's a good question. So we haven't built it yet, to be honest with you. So we are building a provision where you can designate a loan to be forgiven. We don't have that yet. So you need to, and I can send you the clause, or if you have the clause, you just basically cut and paste it into the will. And if you're doing multiple wills planning, you do it in the secondary will. One thing to be careful of, and in our multiple wills, it's built in, but I had a situation where the debt was in the secondary will, but it was a mortgage, and I couldn't discharge it. I'm having problems discharging it because I don't even need to probate the primary will. So you need that, and you need a probated will to discharge a mortgage. So it's a bit of so we put that actually in the primary will. We give authority to the executor in case somebody raises some argument to discharge the mortgage, like to register a discharge in the primary will.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. But we're on that forgiveness because I have that, I have that that's a major issue that's right near the top of our list as well. One of the reasons, it always asks us, if you have more than one kid, I don't know I don't know what we did here, but, have you advanced any additional monies to one kid over another, and how do you want those dealt with? That's an advisor alert. And so obviously we need that forgiveness provision. So we're working on it.
Great, thanks.
Well, thanks everybody. I really appreciate you taking the time and spending some time with us. And don't forget, you can always email us, and on our website, if you go to the support tab and you wait about 10 seconds, because there's a little chat that comes up, and you can chat. It'll come up right here, and you click on it, and there it is. And you can chat directly with one of our support, Michaela or myself or Nick or Thomas. If you have a quick question and you're in here, how you can search, of course, our support, and we have questions to lots of different things about appointments and all those other things. But if you can't find the answer in here, or you just want to, chat, feel free to do that. All right. Everybody take good care, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, Jordy.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.